Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're completely shattering those historical myths you probably learned back in school. We're going to uncover how time, human bias, and sometimes just pure sensationalism have totally warped our understanding of the past. If you've ever believed that history is just this perfect, unchangeable record, well, prepare to have your mind blown. We're going to look at the hard evidence and see what actually happened.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the myths of ancient Egypt, the truth about Sparta, Rome's tall tales, the Aztec god illusion, and finally, the causes of the Great Depression. Let's jump right in. Section 1. Myths of Ancient Egypt, Pyramids and Curses. We all kind of picture the pyramids being built by endless armies of forced slaves, right? It's everywhere in movies. But actually, the historical reality is completely different. The main labor force, it was just everyday farmers. Yep, farmers. They were conscripted through something called the corvée duty system. Basically, when the Nile River flooded every summer and farming was impossible, these citizens paid their taxes to the state through manual labor. That meant building temples and, of course, pyramids. And they weren't starving either. They were actually well-housed and fed a really high-quality diet of meat and bread. I mean, think about it. You can't exactly haul giant multi-ton stone blocks if your workforce is emaciated. And to show just how valued these laborers were, they actually had real leverage. Check out this quote from an 1170 BC artisan strike. Well, it's a modern paraphrase, but you get the idea. During the construction of Pharaoh Ramesses III's tomb, the workers promised rations just didn't show up. So what did they do? They literally dropped their chisels, marched right up to the ruling class's temples, stood their ground, and flat out demanded their food. And guess what? They won. Okay, moving on to King Tut's notorious curse. We all know the Hollywood legend, disturb a mummy and you're doomed. Well, that was literally 1920s fake news. The whole myth started when Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy guy who funded the tomb's discovery in 1922, died 4 months later. A journalist wanting to sell more papers just completely fabricated the idea of a written curse. So what actually killed Lord Carnarvon? A mosquito bite. He accidentally slashed an infected mosquito bite while shaving and tragically died of blood poisoning. Absolutely no ancient magic involved. If we look at the hard data, the real story comes down to this number, 8. Out of the 58 people present when King Tut's tomb was opened, only 8 died within the next dozen years. And those deaths were just normal, everyday things, ranging from natural causes to regular accidents. The vast majority of the team went on to live long, perfectly healthy lives. So yeah, the curse myth, completely busted by the numbers. Moving on to Section 2, the truth about Sparta, eugenics exposed. Pop culture has absolutely convinced us that the Spartans practiced vicious eugenics. You know the story, inspecting newborns and tossing anyone deemed weak straight off Mount Tegedos. But the reality is actually pretty wild. That massive claim, it comes almost entirely from just one guy, the Roman historian Plutarch. And here's the real kicker. Plutarch was writing this stuff 6 centuries after Sparta's peak. To put that in perspective, that is like someone today writing a completely unverified rumor about the year 1400 and everyone just accepting it as hard fact. And modern science pretty much puts the final nail in the coffin for this myth. Recent archaeological excavations at those supposed baby-throwing cliffs have found exactly 0 infant or toddler bones. Nothing. Sure, they found a few adult remains, but absolutely 0 evidence to support Plutarch's wild claims of mass infanticide. It turns out this was likely just ancient political slander that we somehow accepted as real history. All right, Section 3, Rome's tall tales, gladiators and Nero. Whenever we see gladiators on screen, it's a guaranteed bloodbath, right? A fight to the death every single time. But the reality? Gladiators were highly trained, incredibly expensive athletes. Honestly, think of them more like modern-day professional MMA fighters. Because they were such massive financial investments, their managers really wanted them kept alive. They actually fought in highly regulated matches, overseen by referees, who were usually retired gladiators themselves. And those refs would absolutely jump in and stop the fight before a fatal blow was dealt if someone yielded. The Colosseum was essentially ancient UFC, complete with highly specific, unique fighter classes just to keep the crowds hyped. You had the Democharis fighting dual-wield with 2 swords, the Radiarius chucking nets and tridents, and then, well, my personal favorite, the Andabate. These guys were condemned criminals, forced to fight completely blindfolded in sealed helmets. Seriously, it was a chaotic, incredibly dangerous spectacle, kind of like human piñatas just swinging wildly at each other in the dirt. Speaking of Roman rumors, we've got to talk about the Great Fire of Rome.
The famous story is that the mad Emperor Nero gleefully played the fiddle while his city burned to the ground in 64 AD. Some even say he started the fire himself just to clear land for a new palace. But the actual history? Nero was miles away when the fire started, and he ended up organizing and funding a massive disaster relief effort.
When you break down the timeline, it clears his name completely. When the fire first broke out in Rome's densely packed wooden shopping districts, Nero was safely out of town in the coastal city of Antium. The moment he heard the news, he rushed right back, opened up his own private gardens to shelter all the newly homeless citizens, and paid for the relief out of his very own pocket. Oh, and as for him playing the fiddle during the blaze? Literally impossible. The fiddle wouldn't even be invented for another 900 years. Next up is Section 4, the Aztec God Illusion, Cortez and Moctezuma. It's so widely taught that the Aztec ruler Moctezuma was totally paralyzed by awe because he mistakenly believed Hernan Cortez was the prophesied feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl. Well, surprise, this is a total fabrication. It was a lie spun decades after the fact. The whole thing was just a sensationalized retelling designed to make the native populations look super superstitious and feeble-minded while simultaneously glorifying the Spanish conquerors. If we look at the actual writings from the Spanish who were physically there, like the Chronicles of Bernal Diaz del Castillo, Moctezuma was perfectly grounded in reality. This paraphrased quote really captures the vibe of their actual meeting. Moctezuma basically looked at Cortez and said, "Look, I see you are flesh and blood just like me. I know you're just a bunch of foreigners, not some otherworldly divine beings." Now, were the Aztecs shocked by things like foreign horses and gunpowder? Absolutely. But they never for a second thought these guys were immortal gods. They knew exactly what they were dealing with, foreign invaders. And our final stop, Section 5, Causes of the Great Depression, the Economic Dominoes. All right, you probably learned in school that the spectacular 1929 stock market crash was the direct trigger of the Great Depression. But the truth? The crash was really just the final, flashing warning light that the global financial system was already broken. The rot had set in years before anyone panicked on Wall Street. Let's actually trace how this went down through a series of economic dominoes. Following World War I, there was this massive boom in consumer goods, which led directly to step 1, mass overproduction. Factories were just churning out way more stuff than people could ever buy. So to protect domestic profits, the U.S. passed the aggressive Fordney-McCumber tariffs in 1922. That kicked off a global trade war, bringing us to step 3, shrinking global demand. With nobody buying this massive surplus of goods, companies started hemorrhaging money. That led to step 4, mass corporate layoffs, and finally, step 5, with zero income, companies went totally bankrupt, and because deposit insurance wasn't a thing back then, the banks backing them collapsed entirely, just vaporizing people's life savings. It was only after this absolutely devastating domino effect that the heavily speculated stock market finally crashed. Basically, banks had lent out whatever money was left to speculators. When it became completely obvious that the underlying economy was failing, investors completely panicked and sold off their shares, crashing the market and wiping out what little wealth was left. The crash didn't cause the foundation to crumble. It was just the loud, crashing sound of an economy that had already fallen off a cliff. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a question to chew on. Knowing that our accepted historical facts have so often been totally twisted by ambitious journalists, ancient gossips writing centuries late, and political propagandists, what other facts are you taking for granted today? It's a huge reminder that we always need to look closely at the sources, question the dominant narrative, and just keep learning. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the past, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.